Hey there everybody, how's it going? My name is ThamRiel. Welcome to Beginner's Best Classes and Jobs video for new players to Final Fantasy XIV. You thinking about picking out a class for Final Fantasy XIV? I get asked a lot about which class that people should start with regarding tanks, healers, or DPS, either on stream or in comments on my videos. That answer is usually really hard to answer on a whim, especially on a stream, because everybody enters Final Fantasy XIV with a different skill set or something they want in particular in Final Fantasy XIV. Some players have a little bit more experience while others have absolutely none. And whichever player you end up being, that's perfectly okay whether you have experience or none at all. I'm making this video today in order to help you describe a little bit about the classes and jobs that eventually those classes become in Final Fantasy XIV in order to help you make a decision based on what I tell you, based on the information, the facts about these particular jobs, as well as certain bulletin points regarding each particular job. Now, before we get into Final Fantasy XIV, we gotta talk about the different roles that Final Fantasy XIV classes and jobs face. We have the tanks. They take the enemy attention and receive the damage from the adds and bosses so that the rest of the party doesn't have to get hurt. The healers, who prioritize healing party members, and tanks, they get injured, but also have the DPS capabilities, and DPS, the people that kill the boss and the adds as fast as possible in order to end the encounter. This in turn creates a trifecta of tank, healer, DPS, which makes a nice balance for the party that you run in regarding dungeons or raids. Everyone is doing those assigned jobs as well as those sub-jobs, and everyone works together to defeat a single foe or a multitude of foes, depending on the encounter. For this video, I want to break it up in separate criteria as well as give bonus information on particular jobs in Final Fantasy XIV that players will be able to unlock at a later time in Heavensward and Stormblood expansion. Talk a little bit about them, mention them for the players that are considering getting a character boost or are going to be getting a character boost with their introduction to Final Fantasy XIV. You do not need a character boost in order to experience Final Fantasy XIV, but some players in particular may be more inclined towards it. Made a video about character boost and what my thoughts were originally about it. I'll leave it in the link description below. It is still technically available for you to get out there if you want to, although it's not highly promoted as it will be, let's say for example in World of Warcraft, where a character boost would be right there on a home screen as you log in. Nevertheless, I'm gonna break up the criteria for this video for beginner tanks, beginner healers, beginner melee, and beginner ranged. As said earlier in the video, we're going to be opening up with tanks here. Your main objective as a tank is to keep the attention on you. The boss and the adds and the enemies, all the enemies within the vicinity have to be attacking you, have to keep their attention on you. If they attack the DPS or the healer especially, it is game over. It is really bad news. You do not want the healer or the DPS getting attacked. Make sure to maintain all attention on you. Your side job is use defensive cooldowns to manage damage and to help do some damage yourself. A lot of tanks find spots and pockets of time in order to maximize the amount of damage output they can do in order to end the fight a lot faster towards the end of the game. The first class we're going to talk about is a gladiator, your basic sword and board tank. At start, it's pretty fairly easy in my opinion. It utilizes a shield as well as a one-handed sword, and with the shield it's able to passively block attacks from now on. It will use several abilities also towards the endgame to mitigate and increase the block chance in order to make it a lot easier for you to block certain attacks, which means Gladiator will always have that passive chance of blocking attacks. It has less focus on damage like the Marauder does, but has a good start at defensives from the very early level. It's a pretty easy tank to play in the very beginning as a class tank. It can eventually be upgraded into the Paladin job, which is more of the same as the Gladiator, focusing a little bit more on defensives compared to like how Marauder upgrades to Warrior, which focuses a little bit more on the offensive. As a Paladin, you'll also get tank stance and a DPS stance. You'll primarily find yourself sitting in tank stance as you level, but every now and then you'll find yourself switching over to the DPS stance, the sword oath stance rather than the shield oath stance, in order to do some damage. At endgame, it has nicely paced rotation with nothing too crazy thrown in between. For the most part, it's an ebb and flow motion of the ocean, as I like to call it. Overall, it's a very solid tank if you're new to MMOs or want something familiar. It comes with a lot of utilities, a lot of great cooldowns, defensive for both yourself and the party. It's a pretty standard tank to play. If you ever played anything with a sword and shield in any MMO beforehand, or you never had any experience beforehand, this is going to be a very easy or familiar tank for you to get into. Now, Marauder is considered more of the butcher for the two starting class tanks. At the start, it's fairly easy, just like the Gladiator. No blocks, but has a lot of high damage from the very start. It's able to generate aggro fast with its high damage output, meaning all the ads and the boss will always keep the attention on you. Just like the Gladiator, it's very easy to tank in the very beginning. It upgrades into a warrior job at level 30, which focuses more on damage than expected from a tank. If warrior does not have to off-tank anything whatsoever or have to do any tank mechanics, it will primarily be sitting in a DPS stance in order to do a lot of damage and help with downing a boss. Warrior has two stances, one tank stance and another uber mega powerful Felcleave stance, which a lot of warriors love, which allows them to maximize their damage. Warrior has a very high skill cap at a higher level for best DPS, which some tanks can do an amazing job at. Maximizing your DPS as a warrior and playing it extremely optimally and extremely well is going to be a little bit difficult for starting players. But if you want something more advanced, I cannot recommend anything but a warrior. Warrior has a lot of room to grow for any aspiring tanks that want to get better. Warrior still has a lot of great tanking abilities and is able to mitigate a lot of the damage really nicely, but its main focus is to be an off-tank. Its primary role is to sit in the back and do tanking when tanking is necessary, otherwise it focuses on doing a lot of DPS and helping out kill the boss a lot faster. Now the third tank is the Dark Knight, which focuses more on mana management. It starts out in Heaven's Word expansion and starts at level 30 with no base class. It's an overall simple, easy through and through tank to play in my personal opinion. Your mana management is the only big curve for Dark Knight. It doesn't have as many endgame party utilities as a paladin or warrior does and feels overall as a pretty selfish job, but doing mechanics as a Dark Knight becomes really easy because it's so easy and fun to play as. If you're good at managing mana as your primary resource, and you want to play as something of an easy tank, I highly recommend Dark Knight. Some players prefer playing Dark Knight because they either understand the mana management resource game for it a little bit better, or they have an easy time picking up on the mechanics and doing mechanics properly as a Dark Knight. Skill-wise, I think Dark Knight is just slightly more difficult than a Paladin and much easier than a Warrior. Back in Heaven's Word, Dark Knight used to be a specific specialist because it used to mitigate a lot of magical damage, which the other things couldn't mitigate, but Paladin ever since in Stormblood received the ability to block magical attacks, which allows Paladin to do magical mitigation really well. And a final verdict for the tanks: if you are a brand new tank to Final Fantasy XIV and to any MMO and want to find something very simple and easy to follow along with, Gladiator is your best starting point. If you are a tank that feels more advanced and wants to get into something a lot more complex in the future, highly recommend playing as Marauder. It's both fun and easy to play in the very beginning and gets a lot more challenging and complex at the end game. If you prefer to do mana management and like the feel of the job for Dark Knight, it might be for you. It's a pretty simple job to play if you consider boosting your character. Now we're gonna move on to the healers. Your main job as a healer is to heal the tank, self, and party. Or sometimes you have to heal yourself and then tank and then party. You want to make sure that you stay alive. You want to make sure the tank stays alive and everybody else in your party stays alive as well. You won't be able to heal everybody, especially if they're standing in mechanics like fire. Sometimes your party members will die. You just have to resurrect them back mid-battle or when possible. Your side job is, if you can find opportunities, try to DPS and do some damage. If everybody is contributing together in Final Fantasy XIV, you can down a boss really quickly. The one and only baseline start for Final Fantasy XIV classes as a healer is Conjurer. If you ever played a cleric or basic priest like a holy priest of World of Warcraft in any other MMO, then Conjurer will be right up your alley. As a lot of standard direct healing abilities, it's easy to learn and even get some DPS abilities for questing. Comes with a lot of baseline healing spells, healing players for certain percentage depending on which spell you use. More powerful spells heal for a lot more, but use up a lot more mana. Plus healing over time abilities that apply a blanket buff that heals players over time for certain percentage. I feel like Conjurer and White Mage is a really good heal to learn the basics with. Usually a White Mage is a must for the raid party because it provides the baseline direct heals, which is really important for any party or raid. In my personal opinion, it is a very solid healer for starting players in Final Fantasy XIV that have never played a healer before. Arcanist is a very complicated healer to talk about because it only gains its healing capabilities at level 30. Until then you have to DPS using a pet in order to fight alongside you. Arcanist has the ability to unlock two separate jobs at level 30, a Scholar and a Summoner. Scholar focuses on healing while Summoner focuses on DPS. When leveling a Scholar or Summoner, you also level its counter job. So say for example you gain 5 levels as a Scholar, you also gain 5 levels as a Summoner. These two jobs level together. Scholars gain a fairy pet that heals alongside with them. For the most part in the very early levels, fairy can heal on autopilot while you DPS a little bit on a side. It's very easy at first, but it's better get used to doing some proper fairy management towards endgame in order to maximize its output. Scholar focuses more on shielding and protecting its allies to absorb damage. If you ever played Discipline Priest back in World of Warcraft, back in the days when Discipline Priest used to apply a lot of bubble absorbs, then this will feel pretty similar. This particular job could definitely be recommended to experienced healers. If you ever healed in the previous MMO before and you want to try something different, more towards the mitigation approach rather than the healing approach, you could definitely try out Scholar. It comes with a lot of utilities of its own and it's very needed in a lot of parties. Knowledge of a fight is a must for a Scholar in order to counteract damage quickly, but not required if learning. Once you learn the fight, you'll be able to perfectly know when to apply certain shields and certain absorbs in order to counteract a lot of AoE party damage or tank damage. Making sure that you get an absorb right before a tank buster happens is very important. Scholar, along with White Mage, are considered core healers. Having a White Mage to heal the wounds and having a Scholar to absorb the damage ahead of time so the party members or the tank don't suffer as much damage is very important. It goes hand in hand in making sure that a raid goes well. Now, a third healer that was added in Heaven's Ward is called Astrologian. It fills the role that is missing from a party. It starts at level 30 and it's able to switch stances to cover healing or shielding. It's not able to maximize or perform as best as a White Mage or Scholar can, but it's able to substitute its lack of healing or shielding with its arcane deck to provide buffs. Scholar is able to draw one of 6 cards. One that shields friendlies from damage, increases damage dealt, increases critical strike, increases weapon skill and casting speed, and generates tactical points used for melee abilities. The cards are very RNG based but can provide some amazing buffs towards your party. You can even sacrifice certain cards in order to add special effects, such as a spread effect that applies a singular buff card to all your party members, extends it, or increases its potency. Astrologian is really good at filling the role of the missing healer and then some. So say for example your raid party has a Scholar and you play as Astrologian, you'll be able to somewhat fill in the healing role. Or vice versa, if you have a White Mage in your raid party, you'll be able to somewhat fill in the shielding role. You don't maximize in one particular role, you're there as an in-between and provide buffs for your party members. So all in all, regarding healer, Conjurer is really good for basic starter heals. Scholar at level 34 Arcanist is something that more experienced healers should definitely consider, as it's more challenging and it's more absorb based, which I think a lot of healers would find more fun. Astrologian in Heaven's Ward, in case you're boosting a character, focuses more on substituting a role that is necessary, as well as providing card mechanics to buff up party members. Now we're gonna move on to the DPS. DPS objective is to kill things really fast. We'll start off with the melee, and we'll start off with Lancer, one of my favorite ones actually in particular. It's pretty easy to play early on. You have to maintain a damage buff by using a certain weapon skill, and there's some minor positionals to focus on during the early game. You can eventually upgrade into a Dragoon at level 30 and learn the core mechanic for Dragoon, the jumps. It's a high potency ability that can be used and weaved in between your rotation and between your combo in order to maximize your damage, but it locks you into an animation lock. The animation lock is when you get stuck in an animation, so you can't physically move the character until the animation ends. All jump animation locks you, and that can sometimes lock you in for moving out of AoE, which means if you jump at the wrong time, you may just get hit with an AoE marker from the boss. While jumps are really important for the core mechanic of Dragoon, you gotta make sure that you be smart about jumps or when to jump. Make sure you time it properly so that you don't get hit by AoEs. Dragoon towards the very end game has a 5-button combo that you'll have to learn. It may seem intimidating, but it's actually extremely easy to follow up with. It's long, but it doesn't particularly change anything regarding your positionals. There are still some positionals to worry about, which means you have to strike a target from a certain position with certain abilities in order to maximize the damage, such as from the rear or from the flank. Dragoon has been designed and redesigned in Stormblood so that if it's not too punished if the positional requirements are not met for certain abilities. You do have a 5-button combo after all, so sometimes you may not be able to hit all of it if the boss is moving around. Dragoon can maintain a Blood of the Dragon buff, which increases its jump potency for 2 particular jumps and opens it to stronger abilities mid-fight, which is easy to maintain within the 5 combo rotation. The only hurdle that you can really get in Dragoon is the animation lock. Aside from that, it's a pretty fun job to play. Let's move on to the Rogue class, which cannot be a starting class for you. It needs to be unlocked at level 10 if you start in Limsa Laminsa, or 15 if you start in any other capital cities. It is very simple to get into, just like the Lancer. The only big hurdle with Rogue at the start is to maintain a damage over time ability on your opponent, which is very simple. There are minor positionals as well. It can eventually upgrade into a ninja at level 30, and gets a mechanic for ninjutsu. Ninjutsu uses a mudra sequence combo, and certain sequences change what ninjutsu does. Sometimes it could be a single target damage, sometimes it could be an AoE damage, sometimes it could be a weapon skill speed buff, and depending on the certain sequence that you enter, you will get a different ninjutsu to utilize. Ninja only has one animation lock, which is the finisher that lets you do a lot of damage when the enemy is below 20% health. Compared to Dragoon, it's a very minimal animation lock to deal with. Ninja has a pretty simple rotation end game, but you do have to make sure you focus on casting ninjutsu. That is the biggest curve for you. Your main objective as a ninja is to maintain attack speed buff from your mudra, and then later extend it through your flank combo. Unlike Dragoon, you should definitely focus on doing positionals whenever you can. There should be no reason for you not to do the positionals properly as a ninja. If you can remember certain sequences, then ninja might just be for you. If you can remember the sequences for mudras and all the sequences you're going to need to use within a raid or a dungeon, then ninja might just be your job to play. Third class that you have in Final Fantasy XIV as a melee is the Pugilist. It's very easy to get into and uses fist weapons in order to fight. As a Pugilist, you'll be maintaining a damage over time ability on the enemy, maintaining a damage buff through certain sequences, and it's major on positionals all the way through to the max level. Understanding which positions to use when for Pugilist will help you maximize damage, and this will continue all the way through till you get your job. Pugilist has a pretty simple rotation for the most part, and has for the most part only two primary combos to worry about. Each combo goes from stance to stance to stance, leading you from stance number 1 to stance number 2 to stance number 3 that unlock next set of abilities for you to utilize, so you will never get confused on which abilities to use next. Positions. Understanding your positionals and be able to maximize your positionals is very important for Monk. You get to learn it very early on as a Pugilist, but in Monk it becomes a dire need of whether you maximize your damage or you do very little damage. Grease Lightning will be a set of stacks that you'll be able to gain whenever you finish off your 3-button sequence. After your third sequence within the combo, you'll get a stack of Grease Lightning. You can stack up to 3 stacks of Grease Lightning. These stacks of Grease Lightning will increase your attack speed, which make you actually fight faster. So your main priority is to remember the positionals and to maintain the Grease Lightning stacks in order for you to do a lot of damage in very little time and maintain your attack speed. If you go with positionals overall and you think you might be able to maintain the Grease Lightning stacks, then this job might just be for you. Now, before I finish off and talk about the 3 particular classes to start with, I do want to talk about Samurai. It is locked in Stormblood and it starts at level 50. It has minor positionals, kind of like the Dragoon has. It utilizes combos in order to build Sen. It spends Sen on Yajutsu. Yajutsu forms into different abilities depending on the number of Sen that you collect. You can collect up to 3 Sen on Samurai. You also build something called a Kenki Gauge, which can be spent to empower abilities and do damage. For the most part, you just have to worry about minor positionals and maintaining one singular dot throughout the fight. Overall, it has a very high DPS for a job, and in fact, I feel like it's actually relatively simple to play. So all in all, if you don't mind the animation lock and the 5-button combos, Lancer might be for you. If you're good at memory games and sequence games, then Rogue may be good for you for the mudras as a ninja. If you're good with positionals, then Pugilist is definitely your particular job. And if you don't like either 3 of those and you're boosting a particular job, then might as well just boost the Samurai. It does a ridiculous amount of damage, has very little maintenance, and overall very simple to play in my personal opinion. It's pretty simple to learn, however it will take a time to master, just like with any other job. So don't be going into Samurai just expecting high DPS all the time. And last but not least, we'll talk about the Ranged. We'll start off with Thaumaturge, which has a lot of casting, switches between the hot and cold mechanical or magic, stacks Astral Fire and Astral Ice to empower abilities while making the opposite element easier to cast. Thaumaturge focuses on the importance to switch between Astral Fire and Astral Ice throughout the battle. Astral Fire does a lot more damage, Astral Ice is there to recover mana. When you have Astral Ice on, you have high mana recovery regen, which makes mana practically obsolete for Thaumaturge if you know how to balance Astral Fire and Astral Ice and dance between the two stances pretty well. In between of that, you'll be maintaining a Thunder damage over time ability on the opponent. At level 30, you unlock the Black Mage, which will increase more damage. Burn the enemies in astral flames. Let the flames of hell char your enemies to crisps. Also, you have to maintain something called Enochian, which will give you access to Fire 4 and Ice 4, which are best abilities to maintain for damage and to utilize for damage, both working in tandem with one another. The biggest curvature for Thaumaturge and Black Mage is to go between hot and cold like the Katy Perry song, as well as to avoid standing in AoEs. You're gonna have a lot of long cast times for a lot of your abilities, which means you may be sometimes caught in AoEs. Try to move out of them or finish a cast before you get hit. Arcanist is a slightly different caster, focusing more on casting and damage over time abilities. It also has the battle pad for assistance, just like we talked about for Scholar. The pet can do a lot of tanking for you, which makes leveling a lot easier for yourself. At level 30, you can upgrade it into a Summoner or a Scholar, and we talked about how they both level together. We'll talk a little bit about the Summoner for Arcanist since we're talking about the DPS, since Summoner is the DPS job for the Arcanist. It has a major focus on your pet doing damage alongside with you. As you level up, you get more powerful pets, embodying the spirit eggies of 3 particular primals, Ifrit, Titan, and Garuda. Majority of your endgame gameplay will orientate about having a pet and going from sequence to sequence in order to summon the Bahamut Eggy. Bahamut Eggy does a lot of burst damage, which is why you want to try to summon it as soon as possible. Everything will have to go from your basic rotation and your basic stance to entering Dreadworm Trance, which will allow you to do a lot more damage, to then at a certain point build up the ability to summon Bahamut, and then summon Bahamut at the right time in order to maximize your damage. Just like Scholar, Summoner is very important about timing everything together. If you summon Bahamut at the wrong time and miss out on a lot of damage, then you're going to be doing very little damage for your party. You want to make sure you're contributing a lot of damage towards the enemy and trying to take him down. Your role as DPS is to kill the boss as fast as possible, after all. Summoner and Scholar are very calculated jobs, so it's definitely not going to be something for the beginners to fully understand. In order to maximize and do the best on those particular jobs, you have to take a lot of time to fully understand what class you're playing and what job in your role. Moving on to physical damage, we're going to start off with Archer. For the most part, you run around and shoot. Kiting becomes very easy at the very beginning because you can avoid a lot of enemy damage as well as doing a lot of damage towards the opponent without them being able to reach you. At the very early game, you start maintaining 2 separate damage over time abilities on the enemy as well as 1 critical buff, which is going to be very important. For the most part, you just pew all the way. Maybe it's because I play Bard and Archer, but Bard and Archer for me particularly felt extremely easy. Archer can eventually upgrade into a Bard, which uses songs to maximize on more damage capabilities. Bard comes in with a lot of utility, and as one of the 2 physical ranged DPS, it is able to recover mana and tactical point for your party and raid really quickly. The only big curve behind Bard is knowing when to switch songs in a particular repertoire, as well as maintaining the dots and the crit buff. Otherwise, it's an extremely simple job to play and extremely fun if you want to be able to run around the battlefield and just shoot everything. The unfortunate drawback of the Bard is that you might find yourself not doing as much damage as most jobs towards endgame, but you can still pull a lot of its weight as long as you learn the rotation and learn how to maximize on your damage for yourself and for your party as well. Now talking a little bit about the expansion jobs here, we have the Machinist, which is locked in Hemsworth and starts at level 30. Unlike Archer, which uses bow and arrow, Machinist uses gun mechanics and utilizes summoning of turrets in order to utilize their utility and some minor DPS increase. Primary damage mostly will come from the Machinists themselves. Like I said, turret is primarily there to provide minor utility. The biggest curve on Machinist is to maintain the DPS buff and make sure you have the Gauss Barrel on you in order to increase damage and heat. Machinist comes with particular overheat mechanic. When heating up, your main abilities will do more damage and will evolve later on towards endgame. When overheating, you do a lot more damage for a small period of time, but then follow it up with a cooldown afterwards where you do a little bit less damage. Machinist overall has a really good damage opener, but is affected by latency, at least for me. It is hard to pull off good opener because rapid fire reduces global cooldown severely, but latency can still hinder that for me ridiculously. If you have low latency, however, I highly recommend trying a Machinist. It has overall really good DPS in general. It also comes with its own utilities as well. It's able to recover mana and tactical points just like Bard is, and while it may not have the same repertoire of utilities as Bard does, it's still able to provide some assistance here and there. Last but not least, we have Red Mage, which is unlocked in Stormblood and is starting off at level 50. It's a very simple caster to play and has a particular mechanic called dual casting. When dual casting is activated after casting a first initial spell, it lets you insta-cast another ability that would usually be a lot longer. This allows for you to be able to fire off 2 spells all at once as a Red Mage. You can also dual cast a Resurrect spell, which Red Mages can do really well in learning parties for raids and dungeons, which means you become pretty much a res bot for your entire party. Congratulations! Red Mages use a combination of white and black magic of air, thunder, stone, and fire to fill up black and white bars on their particular job meter. Once both at least fill to 80% on both, a 3-combo melee combo wombo with your fencing blade. After that combo, you'll be able to immediately end it with Verholy or a Flare in order to start the casting rotation again. You go from primary casting to modern melee on and off. In my opinion, Red Mage is a very simple caster to play and in fact feels like the easiest caster in my personal opinion. Some people may be able to argue with me in particular, but compared to what Black Mage and Summoner have to go through, I feel like Red Mage it has a little bit easier time overall. So all in all, towards the end, I feel like if you just prefer to cast and do a lot of damage, you want to play as a Thaumaturge. If you want to be able to have a pet to be able to tank for you, you definitely want to play as the Arcanist, and eventually get to a Summoner, although it is definitely an advanced job to learn towards the end game. Archers for the easy pew-pew-pews if you want to just be able to run around with a bow and arrow and kite everything. Machinist if you feel a little spicy, don't want to do a lot of magic. It is pretty advanced, but it can also be a hit or miss depending on your latency. And Red Mage is just easy to learn and fun to play, good for resing mid-battle, and you become a res bot for most parties if you really want to. And finally, after making such a long-winded video, what do I personally think would be good beginner jobs and classes for beginner players in Final Fantasy XIV? Well, in my personal pick, as a beginner that comes into the game knowing nothing at all, that is just making a character for the very first time, Gladiator for the tank as a very first one if anything, Conjurer for your healer, Lancer or Pugilist as your DPS, Melee DPS, and Archer as your Ranged. If you're coming in from different backgrounds of other MMOs and you want to go for something a little more advanced, Marauder for the tank, Arcanist into Scholar for the healer, Rogue, especially a Rogue in those particular moods that he can do, a little bit more free thinking right now, and Arcanist for the Summoner as your healer. If you're going to be boosting a character, then feel free to boost whatever you want. Regarding to the tanks and healers and DPS that I haven't talked about so far, if you want to boost a Dark Knight, you can. It's really easy and really simple to play, and especially if you like the edgy, darker looking feel that Dark Knight kind of tries to give off in Final Fantasy XIV. Astral Religion is extremely fun and in fact is an absolute pleasure to play. It's an absolute blast. I highly recommend considering getting yourself, even if you don't boost the character, but considering getting and unlocking Red Mage and Samurai at level 50 and trying them out. Maybe you will like them. In fact, I found them to be extremely easy to learn how to play and extremely easy and fun to play because of those simple mechanics. I feel like they might be a little bit simpler than the other DPS that I talked about, but you know, maybe I could be wrong, who knows. Let the internet decide. Nevertheless, in my opinion, I think they're easy. They're pretty simple for me myself. I hope you enjoyed the video. Consider leveling all these classes if you can to at least level 10 to see what they're like up to level 10. If you don't like it at that point, then don't even go into it. It's not gonna be worth it for you at that point, but at least get them up to level 10 whenever you can in your free time. Otherwise, have fun leveling and welcome to Eorzea. I'll see you later.